The future of MarTech might be legless.
More of a strategic approach to your stack. This has a real impact on what does a modern engagement platform look like.
This is no longer theory in my book anymore. It might have been at one point, but this is very real. It's a technology story. It's an organizational structure story. It's a skill set story. It's a resource story. But it's also a content and data readiness story.
The benefits are so huge. I mean, I hate to use the word revolutionary, but there's this idea of the marketing liberation frontier.
Welcome to Real Story on MarTech. Ruthless advocates for your MarTech mission. Advising buyers with just the facts on stacks to get you on the right track.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Real Story on MarTech. I'm Jarrod, Gingras, Managing Director of the Real Story Group.
Hey, I'm Tony Byrne, founder of Real Story Group.
Yeah, thanks Tony for being here. And Tony, today's topic is the real story on the fact that the future of MarTech might be legless. And that's going to come as a shock to some people because we spent the last 5-10 years talking about headless, almost breathlessly. But I think we're realizing that that's not good enough for many organizations.
That's right. And certainly, headless is an important consideration from an architecture standpoint, but we think it's more of a kind of a tactical innovation, whereas what we're going to be talking about today, Jarrod, is more of a strategic approach to your stack.
This is a big trend. I know in 2025, we're getting hit with a lot of different trends, mostly around AI, but this was something that started even before AI, kind of the wave of AI hit us with full force. We were seeing this transition away from a single channel approach to solving architectural challenges and organizations that we work with getting serious about omnichannel again, really investing in an approach that allowed them to provide consistent experiences at every single touch point, online and off, regardless of that channel.
That's right. And, for a long time, when people thought about omnichannel, they thought headless. Let's go headless. It was a sexy term, came out, late in the 2010s, and certainly developers and architects got excited about it, and I think for some good reason. So the whole point, for those of you not familiar with the idea of headless, is that you're decoupling your kind of content. It started out really in the web content management space, that you were decoupling your content from the engagement layer. So in theory, you could then take that content and not just show it on your website, you could also put it into other web applications, your mobile, and so forth. And so you had these web content management systems popping up and saying, well, we're headless, and headless is the future. It's interesting to think about DAM because at some level, Jarrod, aren't digital asset management systems also like the original headless platforms?
They are. Unfortunately, the original DAM systems weren't always used that way. People went to the DAM to find an asset. They did some sort of search. They found what they were looking for, and then they'd go put it somewhere else. I think as organizations kind of progressed and started doing these point-to-point connections between, your DAM system and your web content management system, your DAM system, your e-commerce, your DAM system and your social publishing, and your email tools, I think you started to see the right assets appearing in the places where people were creating experiences. If I'm on the email team working in my email tool, do I need to go to a DAM system and pull an asset out and then put it into my email publishing tool? Maybe not. Maybe I could just work in a headless way where I'm working within my email marketing automation tool, and I'm just able to pull from the DAM without even seeing the DAM. So I never even experienced that. It just came from a single source of truth in the background. So in ways that this concept has kind of started with DAM in many organizations, but the way it's actually been executed is a little bit piecemeal until now. Now people are starting to think truly as DAM as not just this thing over in the corner, but as a foundational platform to your marketing stack. And that's a huge fundamental shift in how people are approaching DAM. And quite honestly, a lot of DAM managers have been slow to kind of move into this direction and realize, hey, I am MarTech. I'm not just a archive or a librarian over in the corner. I am a pivotal part of my organization's content and need to be respected and thought about in the bigger picture as such.
Yeah, so clearly, there were benefits for this evolution of headless systems, certainly very plainly in the DAM marketplace, but then also in web content management, there were benefits about, being able to not have to use the web content management system to actually drive my website. And there's cases for that. The one thing that wasn't always talked about is that there were a lot of limitations of headless systems. They tended to rely on a lot of tech support. You don't always want to decouple your content from engagement. And a lot of the headless web content management systems still only focused on kind of the inbound channel. So they were kind of not really, they were multi-channel, but not really omni-channel. And so, headless really is a kind of a nice tactical feature that's situationally useful within certain contexts, particularly kind of inbound web applications and websites, but it didn't really solve the sort of omni-channel conundrum. And that's really where this whole notion of legless has come up. So first of all, I have to confess, we kind of invented the term legless. We didn't borrow it from anywhere else. We decided we kind of liked the term, at which point a friend of mine from the UK joked that how in Great Britain legless means that you're drunk, and so we paused and says, well, we're still going to use it. Of course, we're going to be talking about a lot of concepts here. And since, for those of you listening to us, you won't actually see any boxes and arrows. So you might have to imagine what we're doing. So maybe you might be better off just, having a drink here before you listen to the rest of it. But we'll still try to describe it, what it looks like, whether you've had a little relaxant or not. But legless is really kind of looking lower in your stack. So headless is kind of at the top of your stack, trying to decouple content from engagement. From your actual delivery layer. What legless says is, look, a lot of your content and data and personalization and other decisioning are kind of locked within specific channels. And what we want to do instead is decouple some kind of enterprise foundation services around content, data, and decision logic, and have it be channel neutral, have it actually reside underneath all your different engagement platforms, which means that those engagement platforms, whether it's social, web, applications, mobile, email, paid media, your chat system, whatever it is, now become legless, and they depend on sort of the enterprise legs to supply them some critical information and logic. And so it's much more omni-channel and has a much more profound impact on your architecture with respect to how it's going to work in the future. So
it's funny, Tony, when we talk about legless, like it's only legless for those of you working within their engagement tier, right? It's those of you working within your web content management system, maybe working within your e-commerce tools and your email publishing, social publishing, your CRM tools, right? For you, it's legless. But we're not saying that your MarTech stack doesn't have legs. In fact, the legs are the most important part of this architecture.
That's right. And, it's really about, supporting your engagement platforms, right, Jarrod?
Yep. So to me, when we talk about legs, maybe it's more like legs of a stool than legs of a person, right? We like to talk about it in three big buckets. When we talk about creating omni-channel experiences, what are the building blocks of omni-channel experiences? They're omni-channel content, omni-channel data, and omni-channel decisions, right? So if you think about those as our three legs of the stool, if you will, and within that are some foundational platforms. We often use the analogy of the MarTech mall. If you think about what should be your anchor stores of your MarTech mall, to kind of take another analogy in a completely different direction. But these are foundational stores, foundational platforms for which you to build upon in your stack.
Yeah, that's right. And it allows you to plug in more new channels, right? Like chat or podcast or other things on top of these solid legs that are then going to carry them where they need to go towards the customer.
And these are things to plug in that we know about today, right? There's a lot of stuff that we don't know about today. So we mentioned AI at the outset, but like, where are you going to plug in your agents to start making decisions and do this combining of content, data, and decisions for you? You can't have them just mining a bunch of systems of engagement and hoping to make some sense out of that. You need to be pointing them at the right content, the right data, and the right decisions to really make some logical decisions on your behalf.
Yeah, I think that's so critical that this architecture is turning out to be really foundational for anyone who wants to leverage AI. It's driving a lot of foundational investments. When we see people getting sophisticated about AI, suddenly the light bulb goes on and says, I need these foundational platforms to really do that. But it's interesting, though, when we think about Legless and how it all came up, I have to confess that originally we saw it as something not necessarily that we were recommending, but we were seeing some smarter enterprises kind of actually starting to do it. They were beginning to see, hey, look, I can't have every channel trying to be, super smart because, you have all this complexity, right, Jarrod? When you have each channel tied up with their own content, their own data, their own personalization algorithms and so forth.
Yeah. And I'm sure we're not alone in seeing this, but we've seen a lot of bloated channel-specific systems. We pick on web content management quite a bit, and this is where the rise of headless really came, and then it kind of expanded into e-commerce and CRM, and you have headless vendors in there as well. But, think about your web. We've been so web-centric in the last couple decades that so much content has been put into our web content systems, web content management systems, so much data, so many rules around what should be displayed to who. When enterprises have come to us and said, hey, we want to reach a channel we weren't thinking about, maybe an offline channel, maybe it's a billboard, maybe it's a kiosk, maybe it's something completely different, maybe it's feeding these AI agents like we talked about, they're struggling of backing stuff out of a tool that was built to serve just a single channel like the web and using it for something else. So they said, what if we could put stuff, not necessarily everything, take everything out of our web content management system, leave the stuff that's right for the web channel in the web content management system, but pull out what is truly omnichannel content, pull out what is truly customer data or product data that is, that we can store in an omnichannel way. And then think about putting decisioning engines in place that tell a story about what should be displayed to who and when across any touch point, in a customer or client or prospect journey.
Yeah, I think it's worth reflecting on how we got here and what are the implications, because when you have these kind of overblown channel platforms, first of all, you start integrating horizontally among them. You say, I need my email system to plug into my Salesforce CRM and also talk to my web content management system, and by the way, also talk to my media platform so that I'm not spending ads talking to someone who's engaging on my website already. All this kind of stuff, and you have this horizontal integration that becomes spaghetti and completely unmanageable, right? And so, but the worst thing is the impact on the cohesive customer experience, where you have a customer who's seeing a personalized website, then a very differently personalized email, then a very differently personalized ad, and then a very differently personalized sort of social experience, and you have this incoherent customer experience. And that was kind of okay before the pandemic, but the pandemic really showed that those of us, trying to be emperors here, we had no clothes on this. And you had all these disjointed, incoherent customer experiences. And really the only way to do that in a scalable way was to have these kind of enterprise legs that were going to drive these things, regardless of channel. So what happened to us is, like, originally we came up with this concept of Legless just to describe what we saw some smart enterprises doing. Now we're prescribing it. In other words, we're recommending it as a definitive architecture that you ought to pursue.
And this is no longer theory in my book anymore. It may have been at one point, but this is very real. We're seeing some real investments happening at that foundational layer. And kind of a nice little byproduct of this is we're seeing some thinning at the engagement layer, whereas those bloated web content management systems, those bloated e-commerce tools, those bloated CRM tools, they can actually get smaller and maybe you can spend a little bit less because you're truly investing at the foundational level. And that's exciting. So let's dig into what should be in your legs, Tony, because this is a transition. Nobody's figured this out completely, but there's been some implications in the marketplace. There's been a rise of some new tools that have come along that's even allowed this conversation to happen. I'll throw customer data platforms as one of the big tools that came on the scene, and all of a sudden there was a marketer-friendly tool that gave you a view of your customer that you were trying to reach without having to go through IT. wow, that's a pretty powerful leg of my stool. And then on the content side, we talked about dams kind of having a root here, and certain dams recognizing this problem and saying, hey, we can be your omni-channel content store. And so we sort of coined this phrase, the omni-channel content platform, or if you think about it in evolution terms, it's sort of the DAM 3.0 of your evolution, where DAM 1.0 was you were off in a corner, just being this single repository for assets. DAM 2.0, you're doing those point-to-point integrations that we talked about. But then there was this chasm that existed where people realized, hey, we need to be thinking differently. We need to be managing content and assets in a more complex way. And we're seeing some of the high-end vendors in the DAM marketplace kind of cross that chasm into saying, hey, we're going to think bigger about content. We're going to think more sophisticated about content, and we're going to allow you to manage content for an omni-channel use case that we were never thinking about before, perhaps.
Yeah. So you talked about, the first two legs of the stool, which are customer data platforms or CDPs, omni-channel content platforms or OCPs. On the decisioning and personalization, next best action side, the progress honestly has been slower. And we have, we meet every 3 months with this MarTech Council of MarTech stack leaders from major enterprises. And they have consistently told us when we've surveyed them that this is an area, this third leg of the stool is probably the weakest leg right now. Some of this is because of the technology. I think journey orchestration engine technology was too weak for what we wanted and maybe ahead of its time as well. And some of the issue is us, that it's very hard to do omni-channel decisioning. Much harder, I think, than this is the toughest leg of the stool. You ought to get the other two set first. There are some interesting things happening here. But that's an area, I think, that has proved the biggest challenge. So those of you sitting out there and thinking, yeah, I can imagine omni-channel data, I can imagine omni-channel content, the omni-channel decisioning, that's going to be a little bit tougher. You're absolutely right. It is tougher. And so that's going to be, something maybe that we'll tackle a little bit better later in the decade.
Yeah, Tony, you mentioned the council that, what we've heard from our council members, and we're the technology analysts, so often we look at everything through a technology lens, but it's been really enlightening for me to hear from our council members to say, or the fact to just recognize that this is a technology problem, but we need to think differently as how we structure our teams to support this model that we're describing, right? Too often we've just lived in this, like, I'm on the web team, I'm on the email team, I'm on the social team, I'm on the e-commerce team, and we use the system that our team bought, right? But to think more enterprise-wide and more holistically so that we can aid the customer regardless of the channel they're interacting with us in, that's a big shift, not only from a technology perspective, but a mental perspective and a team and organizational structure perspective. You need different skill sets, different structures in place to execute on this. And that's what a lot of our customers are doing now, is like rethinking this whole strategy and saying, we're not just going to throw a technology at this problem, but maybe we need to really shift the way we're organized and structured to be successful with this.
Oh, yeah, totally. And that's why, we say that headless was tactical, legless is really strategic. And if you're going to make a strategic change, first of all, you need to have a thematic change. We would say it's a kind of a grammatical change in the way you think about customers, where customers are the subject of your sentence and not the object. It used to be, we're going to market to customer X this way, we're going to advertise to customer Y this way. Instead, with the customer as the subject of your sentence, customer X wants this from you across different channels at different points in their journey. It immediately forces you to think differently about what are the core capabilities that you're going to need across all these channels. And then, of course, there's the business case that you want to think about before you sort of implement this, which is, okay, this is the only way to get to omnichannel. I think, we've said that enough. But also, this is really the only way to scale. If you're having to add more and more people to handle the integration, more and more people within a channel, you're just not going to be able to scale the way that you want and to get the kind of efficiencies that you need going forward, particularly if you have new and different, product and service ambitions, is that having this kind of foundational layer is really the only way to do all of this efficiently.
Definitely.
But so that's the foundational level. But I think you were hinting at earlier. This has a real impact on what does a modern engagement platform look like, as opposed to an engagement platform that was built and beefed up in the pre-Legless days.
Yeah, and I did want to make sure we caveat a couple other things here when we talk about this journey that our customers are on, because it's a technology story, it's an organizational structure story, it's a skill set story, it's a resource story, but it's also a content and data readiness story, because just pulling stuff out of these channel specific systems doesn't mean that it's going to be better, right? We need to be thinking omnichannel and creating content and data for omnichannel use cases, which is really shown a light on how clean our data is. Is it ready for omnichannel use cases? Is our content structured in the right way that we can really take advantage of the different aspects of our content, in with the right granularity? Should we be managing just finished assets, or do we have to manage more componentized models and manage the sophisticated relationships between components and wholes and parts and wholes and components and finished products? This is really challenge the types of technologies that can even be this foundational leg for our organization. And we've seen a lot of, I'll call it kind of fits and starts as it relates to finding the right solution to fill these leg roles. And quite frankly, there's been a lot of trials and maybe more errors, along the way. And unfortunately, there are options out there for buyers, but they're not always good options, right? And not everyone was built to satisfy these use cases that we're talking about, and that's been a real stumbling block.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think to the last episode of the podcast, it wouldn't be Real Story Group if we didn't do a little bit of vendor bashing here. Some of the big vendors like Oracle, Microsoft, especially Salesforce and Adobe, are just not on board with this transition. They've made major investment in engagement platforms that now have to become a lot thinner, a lot more responsive to what's happening with other vendors underneath. And rather than kind of liberating your information, they're trying to lock you into a monolithic stack, when really you want your legs to be kind of Switzerland, to be totally neutral. And this is a huge issue. It's a huge risk for your customers. You need this kind of flexibility and scalability at the engagement layer, that they can work leglessly.
Yeah, and what's frustrating for me, Tony, though, is that you said that some of these big vendors are not architected to solve this, but that doesn't mean their salespeople don't have this story down. They're telling this story. They've recognized this issue. They've recognized what buyers are asking them for, and some of the vendors that you just named are really good at telling a story. But when you peel back the onion, their products are just not built to solve this, and it's really, really frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it means that. What Legless at the engagement tier means that if you're going to have a social platform, a web content management system, email platform, that they can get a data from CDP-Y, that they can get content components from OCP-X, that they can get rules from the journey orchestration engine. And this is just a very different approach. And you're right that the market isn't quite there yet. Certainly us as customers, we're not there yet. I think we're sketching out a kind of an idealized world. But I think we've heard that some council members are working in that direction.
Yeah, there's no doubt. We worked with several of the world's largest hotel chains, and I can tell you firsthand that they're both doing or investing heavily in a information model that serves the global enterprise, right? As opposed to this traditional way of thinking where maybe the owner of that hotel chain is worried about just their stuff and their stuff alone. But now we're starting to think about what does content mean in a global sense, independent of brand, independent of region or of language, and thinking much more holistically and giving the power to the region, certainly where appropriate, but also cashing in on investments that you're making at more of a global foundational stage.
Yeah, that's right. So it's definitely hospitality where we've seen, CDPs and journeys together to drive coherent experiences across mobile apps, increasingly important email ads, websites, so on, the funnel. And they couldn't do this if the information, the data, and the logic was trapped in silos. Or we know multiple large consumer product goods CPG firms that are very focused now on multi-channel and are beginning to realize the impact of first-party data for better media spend, but also much more effective use in their owned and operated and partner channels as well. And this is driving them to rethink the way that they organize product data and everything else and product information. The decisioning side, again, a little bit of a still kind of stuck in channel, so there's work to do there. We shouldn't ever underestimate that this isn't a complex, architectural strategic shift to undertake. But the benefits are so huge. I mean, I hate to use the word revolutionary, but there's this idea of the marketing liberation front here, that this is really, although we're talking about architecture, we're really talking about marketers being able to provide coherent, lower cost, more relevant and effective experiences across channels, and make much better use of AI as a helper along the way. So there's huge wins here. But again, it's a strategy and it's an architecture. It's going to take us probably the rest of the decade to fully get there. But that's all the more reason to start now.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard recently from several of my CPG clients in particular are coming to me around AI, and they're saying we're getting asked not just about our own AI, but our distributors are coming to us and say we want to plug in our distribution AI to your content and your data. And they're saying, well, not all of our content, not all of our data, but how are you going to do that if you don't have your content data managed in a way where you can give them slices to have their models learn off of and pull data and content from? That's a massive shift from the world where we owned all of our experiences on our website, right? Now we've lost control of experiences in many cases, and the only thing some of us can control is our data, our content, our decisions, our rules. So the AI is only exacerbating this challenge, and the enterprises that have made the investment into the omnichannel content platforms, the more sophisticated content management systems, the more sophisticated data platforms, and got the structures in place and made sure that it was clean data and clean content managed at the right granularity. Those are the organizations that are going to be able to take advantage of AI quicker than their competitors.
Yeah. So, we've been talking about something somewhat strategic and abstract, but at some level, we're also talking about something that all of us have wanted to do since the dawn of the digital age, which is to provide the right information inside the right experience to the right person at the right time that was going to be relevant to them and drive, either better engagement or certainly higher revenue, at least if not in the near term, then in the long run, and do this all with the right ROI. And we've all been trying to get there through, I think, a lot of tactical approaches. And this is really, I think, the first major strategic innovation that can help us get there.
Yeah, and so this is a complicated topic. It's kind of a big topic that affects so many of us, but in so many different ways, depending on where you sit in the organization. But I encourage all of you listening to check out some of the other research we've done on this topic. I know, Tony, you wrote an article about Legless on LinkedIn and our website. So if you just go to LinkedIn or realstorygroup.com, type in Legless, you should be able to find that. There's a lot of information there. And if any of you are interested in hearing from your peers, I would invite you to apply for a council membership to join this group, because this is a topic that is dominating conversations. Obviously AI is an important one that's dominating some conversations, but it's all within the context of getting your foundations right. And we're really excited about the findings that come out of these council meetings. So if you qualify for joining that council, please feel free to apply on our website, realstorygroup.com/council. In addition, I'd invite anyone to subscribe to this podcast on whatever channel you're interacting with us today. If you have stories about how your MarTech architecture is evolving, feel free to share those as well. We always want to hear those stories, both good and bad. Feel free to tell us your experience, and we'll continue the conversation online and in person. And in council meetings, and we'll continue this conversation on future podcast episodes as well. Thank you all so much for being here today. Tony, thanks. Have a good day.
Great. Thanks, Jarrod.